Hi, I'm Juliana. I'm 32 years old. And for most of my life, my own mother told me I was too soft to ever make it. She said kindness would ruin me. Strength meant being cold. Then one night my phone rang, and her voice was shaking. What happened next changed everything between us. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe for more real family drama and emotional courage stories. The phone rang at 11:47 p.m., loud enough to jolt me awake. I remember the red numbers on the clock clearly, because I stared at them longer than I should have, waiting for the ringing to stop on its own. Nobody ever called me that late. Not anymore. For a moment I thought it might be a wrong number or one of those automated calls. Then I saw her name on the screen. Mom. My chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt in years. We didn't talk late at night. We barely talked at all. I let the phone ring twice more, my hand hovering, my mind racing through possibilities I didn't want to name. Finally I answered. Hello. My voice came out thin, unsure. What I heard on the other end didn't sound like the woman who raised me. Her breathing was uneven. She didn't start with criticism or impatience. She didn't sigh like I was already disappointing her. Instead, she said my name quietly. Juliana. I don't know who else to call. The room felt smaller. I sat up in bed, pulling the blanket around my shoulders even though it wasn't cold. My mother had never said anything like that to me before. She was the one who always knew what to do. Or at least she acted like she did. What's wrong? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause. A long one. I could hear something rustling, like she was moving papers or wiping her face. Then she said, I'm scared. That single sentence hit harder than any harsh word she'd ever thrown at me. My mother didn't admit fear. She used it as a weapon, not a feeling. I waited, unsure how to respond, and she kept talking, her words tumbling over each other. She mentioned the house. A letter. A deadline. Nothing made full sense yet, but the panic was real. As she spoke, my mind kept drifting backward, even though I tried to stay present. I remembered how many times she told me I worried too much. How she'd roll her eyes when I cried as a girl. You're too soft, Juliana, she'd say. Life doesn't reward people like you. Now her voice was shaking and I was the calm one. I asked her to slow down. I asked where she was sitting. She told me she was at the kitchen table, the same one I used to do homework at. I could picture it perfectly. The yellow light overhead. The stack of mail she never opened right away. I imagined her hands probably trembling, something I had never seen before. I didn't want to bother you, she said suddenly, and that almost made me laugh. She had never worried about bothering me before. Still, I didn't say that. I swallowed the thought and told her it was okay. She explained that something had gone wrong. Not all the details, just enough to let me know she felt cornered. She kept saying she had handled everything herself for years, that she didn't understand how it got this bad. I listened more than I spoke. That was new too. Usually she talked over me. At one point she asked, Can you come by tomorrow? The question hung there heavy. My first instinct was to say no. Not out of spite, but out of habit. I had built my life around not being pulled back into her storms. I had learned how to keep distance to stay steady. I need to think, I said honestly. She didn't push. That alone told me how serious this was. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. I felt a strange mix of emotions I couldn't sort yet. Concern, yes. But also confusion. And something else I wasn't ready to name. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hands steady. I noticed that. I remember being younger, how her sharp words used to leave me shaking. Tonight they weren't there. Instead, her fear had crossed the space between us. I thought about how many years it had been since she asked me for anything that wasn't criticism. How often I had been told that my gentle way of handling problems would get me nowhere. And yet, when everything around her felt like it was falling apart, she had called me. Not my tougher siblings. Not a neighbor. Me. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying the sound of her voice, the way she said my name like it mattered. I wondered what she expected from me. I wondered what I expected from myself. By morning, the shock hadn't worn off, but something else had settled in. A quiet understanding that whatever waited for me at her kitchen table, this call had already changed something. The woman who said softness was a weakness had reached out in her weakest moment. And for the first time I realized the call wasn't just about her needing help. It was about her finally seeing who I had always been. The morning light crept through my kitchen window, pale and quiet, but my thoughts stayed loud. I stood there holding my coffee, still hearing my mother's voice from the night before. Not the fear in it, but the fact that she had needed me at all. That feeling tugged at memories I usually kept packed away. Memories from when I first learned that being myself was somehow wrong in her eyes. I was a sensitive child. I noticed moods. I felt tension before words were spoken. If someone raised their voice, my stomach tightened. That wasn't something I chose. It was just how I was built. My mother noticed it early, and instead of guiding me, she labeled it. Too soft, she'd say, shaking her head like she was diagnosing a problem that couldn't be fixed. I remember being 7 and crying over a classmate who moved away. I sat on my bed, hugging a pillow, trying to make sense of why people could just disappear from your life. My mother stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," she said. "You can't fall apart every time something changes." That was the first time I felt embarrassed for feeling deeply. At school, teachers called me thoughtful. Neighbors said I was polite. Other parents trusted me to watch their kids for a few minutes because I was careful and patient. At home, none of that mattered. My mother saw those same traits as weaknesses. She believed the world was harsh, and that the only way to survive was to harden yourself before it did the job for you. When I was 10, I brought home a drawing I'd spent all afternoon on. It was nothing special, just colored pencils and uneven lines, but I was proud. I laid it on the table like it was important. She glanced at it for barely a second. "That's nice," she said flatly. "But art won't help you when real life hits." The paper stayed there unnoticed until I quietly put it away. She had a habit of comparing me to others. My cousin who never cried. A neighbor's daughter who talked back without fear. Even strangers at the grocery store. "See how confident she is?" my mother would whisper, not softly enough. "That's what strength looks like." Each comparison chipped away at me, leaving me unsure of what was wrong with simply being kind. I tried to change. I practiced holding my tears. I bit my tongue when I wanted to speak. I forced myself to laugh when jokes felt cruel. Every adjustment felt like wearing shoes that didn't fit, but I kept walking in them anyway. I thought if I could just toughen up enough, she might finally approve. One afternoon in middle school, a boy pushed another kid into a locker. Everyone froze. Teachers weren't around. My heart raced, but I stepped forward and told him to stop. My voice shook, but I didn't back down. The boy walked away, annoyed more than angry. Later, when I told my mother, hoping she'd be proud, she sighed. "You should have stayed out of it," she said. "Getting involved only causes trouble." That was confusing. I had stood up for someone, and somehow that still wasn't right. I learned then that no version of me seemed to fit her idea of strength. If I stayed quiet, I was weak. If I spoke up gently, I was foolish. The rules shifted constantly, and I was always behind. By high school, the label followed me everywhere inside my own head. Too soft to compete. Too soft to lead. Too soft to handle pressure. When I struggled, her words echoed louder than my own thoughts. If I came home upset about a bad grade or a friendship problem, she didn't ask how I felt. She asked why I was letting it affect me at all. There were moments when I saw flashes of something else in her. Late nights when she thought I was asleep, sitting alone at the table staring at nothing. Once, I caught her wiping her eyes quickly when she heard a sad story on the news. She noticed me watching and turned away, embarrassed. "Go to bed," she snapped. It was the closest I ever came to understanding that she was fighting her own feelings too. Still, that understanding didn't soften her toward me. If anything, it made her push harder. She wanted me to be what she believed the world demanded. She didn't realize she was teaching me to doubt myself instead of preparing me. When college came up, I talked about studying something that helped people. She frowned like I'd insulted her. "You won't survive in competitive environments," she warned. "You need thicker skin." I nodded, even though something inside me resisted. I had already survived years of being told I wasn't enough. There was no single moment where I decided to stop trying to please her. It happened slowly, like erosion. Each comment, each dismissal, wore down the need for her approval. I stopped sharing my hopes. I stopped bringing her pieces of myself she didn't know how to hold. Looking back now, standing in my quiet kitchen decades later, I could see how clearly she had misunderstood me. Sensitivity had never made my life easier, but it had made it honest. Taught me awareness. Taught me care. Those lessons didn't disappear just because she didn't value them. Growing up labeled too soft didn't break me the way she predicted. It shaped me in ways she never noticed. And even though the weight of her words stayed with me longer than they should have, they didn't define the end of my story. They defined the beginning of my understanding that strength comes in more forms than she ever allowed herself to see. That understanding stayed with me as I moved forward, quiet but steady, like a hand at my back. I didn't announce any change. I didn't confront my mother or explain myself. I simply began choosing differently. The first choice was small. I stopped calling her to share my thoughts. I told myself it was temporary just until I felt stronger. But the calm that followed surprised me. When I left home, I expected guilt to follow me everywhere. Instead, I felt lighter. I rented a modest apartment with creaky floors and windows that rattled when trucks passed. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No one questioned my feelings there. No one corrected my tone. Silence became something kind rather than heavy. I still called my mother once a week out of habit. Those calls were short. She did most of the talking. I listened, responding carefully, keeping my voice even. When she asked questions that felt sharp, I learned to answer without opening myself fully. After each call, I noticed how tense my shoulders had been. How slowly they relaxed once the line went dead. Distance didn't come all at once. It built layer by layer. I stopped sharing plans before they were certain. I stopped asking for advice I knew would come wrapped in doubt. When she dismissed something important to me, I didn't argue. I let the comment pass untouched like rain sliding off glass. There was a moment years later when she criticized a decision I'd made about my life. Her voice carried that familiar edge, confident and sure. I waited for the old sting. It didn't come. Instead, I felt detached, as if she were commenting on a stranger. That scared me at first. Then it relieved me. I built routines that steadied me. Morning walks. Simple meals. Quiet evenings with books that felt like conversations rather than instructions. I surrounded myself with people who spoke gently and listened fully. They didn't rush me or push me to be louder, tougher, faster. They met me where I was. My mother noticed the changes, though she didn't understand them. She'd say things like, "You're distant," or, "You never tell me anything anymore." I'd respond with vague reassurances. "I've just been busy. Life's been full." Both were true, just not in the way she assumed. There were times I questioned myself. Was I being unkind? Was distance a quiet form of punishment? I sat with those questions, turning them over slowly. Each time the answer came back the same. This wasn't about hurting her. It was about protecting myself. I remembered how often I'd shrunk to fit her expectations. How I'd swallowed words to keep peace. That version of me had been exhausted. The distance gave me room to breathe, to stretch, to exist without being measured. Holidays were the hardest. The familiar pull of family traditions tugged at me. I'd sit across from her at the table, noticing how she still spoke with authority, how she still believed she knew best. I listened politely, nodding, choosing which comments to let in and which to leave outside. The boundary wasn't visible, but it held. Once, during a visit, she criticized the way I handled a small disagreement with a relative. "You're too gentle," she said, almost bored. I looked at her, really looked, and felt nothing rise in me. No urge to defend. No need to explain. That was when I knew the distance was working. As years passed, the calls became less frequent. Not out of anger. Out of ease. My life filled with things that mattered to me. Work that felt steady. Friendships built on trust. Even ordinary days felt rich in a way I hadn't known before. She tried in her way to pull me back closer. Invitations came with expectations attached. Advice arrived unasked. I accepted what felt safe and declined what didn't, without excuses. Each choice strengthened something inside me. I noticed how my body responded when she wasn't around. I slept better. My thoughts felt clearer. That wasn't a coincidence. It was information. I learned to listen to it. There were moments of sadness too. Distance doesn't erase longing. Sometimes I wished she could meet me where I stood, see the life I'd built and respect it. But wishing didn't change reality. Acceptance did. The distance wasn't cold. It wasn't cruel. It was careful. It allowed me to remain kind without losing myself. It let me hold compassion without reopening old wounds. By the time the phone rang that night, the distance had become part of who I was. It wasn't a wall. It was a boundary shaped by years of quiet decisions. Decisions that kept me whole when nothing else had. And standing there in my kitchen, holding that ringing phone, I understood something clearly. The space I had created wasn't empty. It was strong enough to hold whatever came next. The space I had created wasn't empty. It was strong enough to hold whatever came next. That thought stayed with me as I drove to my mother's house the following afternoon. The road was familiar, yet everything felt different. I noticed things I hadn't before. The quiet of the neighborhood. The way my hands rested calmly on the steering wheel. I wasn't bracing myself. I wasn't rehearsing answers. I was simply going. Her house looked smaller than I remembered. The paint along the porch railing had chipped. A light was on in the kitchen even though it was daytime. I sat in the car for a moment, breathing slowly, letting my body register that I was safe. Then I stepped out and walked to the door. She opened it before I knocked. Her face held lines I hadn't noticed before. Not just age but strain. She tried to straighten her shoulders when she saw me, but the effort didn't quite work. "You came," she said, like she hadn't been sure I would. Inside, the house smelled faintly of old paper and coffee left too long on the burner. The kitchen table was covered in envelopes, neatly stacked but unopened. She gestured for me to sit, then hovered, unsure of herself. That alone told me the balance had shifted. "I didn't sleep," she said, almost defensively. "I kept thinking." "I can see that," I replied gently. She looked at me, then really looked, as if trying to place me. Not the daughter she remembered correcting, but the woman sitting across from her now. I didn't rush to fill the silence. That was new. In the past, silence made me nervous. Now it felt useful. She began explaining what had happened, her words careful, less certain than before. A misunderstanding. A missed deadline. A problem she thought she could manage on her own. I listened without interrupting, noticing how often she glanced at my face, checking my reaction. At one point she stopped and said quietly, "I don't know how to fix this." The admission landed softly but deeply. She had never said that to me before. I felt the old urge to step in quickly, to soothe, to take responsibility. I paused instead. I let her sit with her own words. "We'll look at it together," I said after a moment. "One thing at a time." Her shoulders dropped just a little. Relief maybe. Or surprise. As we went through the papers, she asked questions instead of giving orders. She waited for my thoughts. When I suggested calling someone for clarification, she nodded rather than arguing. Each small exchange marked the reversal more clearly than any dramatic moment could have. Later, she tried to apologize, but the words came out awkward and unfinished. "I might have been hard on you," she said, staring at the table. I didn't rush to reassure her. I didn't deny my experience to protect her comfort. "You were," I said calmly. Not accusing. Just honest. She looked up, startled, then nodded slowly. "I thought I was preparing you." "I know," I replied. And I meant it. Understanding didn't erase the past, but it softened its edges. There was a moment when she grew frustrated, her old tone creeping back in. She snapped about how complicated everything was. I felt it then, the familiar pull to shrink. Instead, I stayed where I was. "Let's take a break," I said evenly. "This won't get solved faster by pushing." She blinked, caught off guard, then leaned back in her chair. "You're right," she admitted. The words seemed to surprise her as much as they surprised me. We sat quietly for a while. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. She watched me sip my water, then said, "You always were patient." Not dismissive this time. Observant. I didn't respond right away. I let that land too. In the afternoon, we took a short walk down the block. She moved slower than I remembered. I matched her pace without thinking. She talked about neighbors, small things filling the space. I listened, noticing how she checked in with me, asking if I was tired, if I wanted to head back. Back at the house, she asked if I'd stay for dinner. There was no expectation in her voice, just a question. I agreed. As she cooked, she asked about my life. Not the surface details she could comment on, but how I felt. I answered honestly, carefully. When she listened without correcting me, Something loosened inside my chest. After dinner, she looked exhausted, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. "I don't know what I'd do without you right now," she said softly. I felt the weight of that, but it didn't crush me. The distance I'd built held firm. "I'm glad I can help," I said. And I was. On my terms. As I left that evening, she hugged me. It wasn't tight or possessive. It was tentative, almost unsure. I hugged her back, steady and calm. Driving home, I realized the reversal wasn't about power. It was about presence. I wasn't the child seeking approval anymore. I was the one offering steadiness. And for the first time, she seemed to understand that the strength she once dismissed had been there all along. Driving home that night, the road lights passed in a steady rhythm, and I felt something settle inside me. Not relief. Not victory. Something quieter. I had stepped into her world without shrinking, and I had walked out still myself. That mattered more than I expected. I kept my hands loose on the wheel, noticing how calm my breathing stayed, even as memories brushed past like scenery. Over the next few weeks I stayed involved but carefully. I checked in, helped sort through practical things, and answered questions when she asked. I didn't rush. I didn't rescue. I let her sit with discomfort instead of smoothing it away. That was new for both of us. Each time I left her house, I paid attention to how I felt. If I sensed tension building, I slowed down. Strength I was learning included listening to my limits. She began calling more often. Not late at night anymore, but in the afternoons. Sometimes she asked for advice. Other times she just talked. I noticed how she waited for my responses now. How she didn't interrupt as quickly. Still, old habits surfaced. She'd make sharp comments about someone else testing the ground. I didn't mirror them. I didn't agree. I let silence answer when words weren't needed. One afternoon, she snapped at me over something small. The tone was familiar. My body reacted before my mind did. A tightening. A warning. I took a breath and said, "I'm happy to help, but not like this." My voice stayed even. No edge. No apology. She stared at me, surprised, then nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. That single moment felt like a line drawn with care. I thought often about what I didn't want to become. I didn't want to harden myself to survive her. I didn't want to confuse control with confidence. I watched my words closely, making sure they came from steadiness, not superiority. There was a difference and it mattered. She struggled with that difference. Once she said, "You don't need to be so careful with me." I smiled gently. "I'm not being careful," I replied. "I'm being clear." She didn't argue. She seemed to be learning too, though slowly and in her own way. There were days when compassion came easily. Other days it took effort. On those harder days, I gave myself permission to step back. I didn't know constant availability to prove anything. Strength included rest. It included choosing when to engage and when to pause. I began to notice how much my life outside her space supported me. Friends who listened. Quiet mornings. Work that felt grounded. These weren't escapes. They were anchors. When I returned to her house, I carried that steadiness with me, like a coat I could put on or take off as needed. One evening, she watched me pack up papers to leave and said, "You've changed." Her voice wasn't accusing. It was curious. I met her eyes. "I've grown," I said. The difference felt important. She nodded slowly, as if filing that away. She tried once to guilt me for not staying longer. The comment landed softly and slid off. "I'll come back later this week," I said. And I did. On my schedule. She noticed. She adjusted. That adjustment mattered more than apologies would have. I realized then that I wasn't there to rewrite our past. I was there to live differently in the present. I could offer kindness without surrendering my ground. I could be strong without being sharp. That balance was something she had never learned, but it didn't mean I had to teach it forcefully. There was a morning when she asked how I handled stress so calmly. The question startled me. I laughed gently. "I don't rush myself," I said. "I listen." She considered that, then admitted she never had. It wasn't a confession, just an observation. It felt honest. As weeks turned into months, the crisis that brought us together eased. Practical problems found solutions. The urgency faded. What remained was a quieter relationship, unfamiliar but workable. We spoke more honestly, though not perfectly. When tension rose, I addressed it early. When kindness flowed, I accepted it without suspicion. I noticed something else too. I no longer replayed her words long after hearing them. They didn't echo the way they once had. My sense of self felt rooted now, not easily shaken. That was the real change. One afternoon as I was leaving, she said, "I used to think strength meant pushing through everything alone." She paused, then added, "I was wrong." I didn't respond right away. I let the moment breathe. "We all learn differently," I said finally. She smiled, small but real. Driving away that day, I understood something clearly. I didn't need her validation to confirm my strength. I had lived it. I had protected my heart without closing it. I had shown up without disappearing. Choosing strength without becoming her again meant honoring who I had always been. The softness she once criticized was the very thing that allowed me to stand steady now. Not brittle. Not hardened. Just whole. That was the ending I carried with me. Not a dramatic break or perfect reunion. Just a quiet, lasting truth. Strength didn't require me to abandon myself. It asked me to stay.